The soul unto itself is an imperial friend, or the most agonizing spy an enemy could send. Secure against its own, no treason it can fear. Itself, it's sovereign of itself. The soul should stand in awe. This poem by Emily Dickinson still stuns me. It describes the self-relationship with the soul being either its master or enemy. But I'm a poet. I read and write poetry every day. I guess most of us will now see this as food for the soul. Instead, we may even associate it with some dreaded English assignment where we have to spend pages to analyze its meaning. But do we seek poetry anymore? Why do we need it? It's old, and isn't it dying? As an article in the Washington Post indicates, fewer people read poetry for pleasure now, with a 6% decrease over the years. What's replaced it now are virtual reality, video gaming, and of course, most importantly, social media. The sensation of reading has been replaced with a more stimulating visual experience. In the last moments of our day, we'd rather check our Instagram story than read a short poem. Reading a poem sounds too hard. People need simpler ways to de-stress. Compared to interpreting an obscure metaphor, we'd just rather watch a video of a cat jumping down and off the roof. But poetry is essential. As Emily Dickinson puts it, it is the essence of language and that of soul. Poetry is never meant to convey an information as quickly as possible. Rather, it acts as an agent to let people pause a moment from their daily routine and reflect on how disconnected we are from whom we envision ourselves to be. In this way, poetry opposes what the ideals of an industrialized, modernized, capitalized society leads us to, full of productivity and efficiency, but lack of curiosity and awareness. What's been keeping poetry essential to human beings is a spirit of individual inquiry and a courage to explore endless possibilities of life. Death, love, reunion, or even the loss of poetry itself. It gives space for diversified voices that seem anomalous from common experience. Depression, anxiety, autism, or even the bad poems that don't rhyme at all. It is often shared through different groups. When we read poetry, we read to connect and understand each other. Poetry reminds us of our inner qualities such as empathy, unity, and freedom. In Emily Dickinson's words, through poetry, the soul is sovereign of itself. Social media catalyzes division. Poetry mends division. While people value the fast spread of information online, almost more than half of the users in America on social media reported last year that they had witnessed verbal abuse on social media. Social media was designed to make people more connected, but it is now causing more tension in politics and society. How do we regain peace in social media while making poetry alive again? Well, the answer might be a combination. What if we turn foes into friends and combine poetry with social media? Some clever poets have already given it a try. They're called Insta poets. They post their poems on Instagram and experiment on the feedback from the audience. In fact, in 2017, among the most popular poetry lists, almost 25% of them come from Insta poets. The biggest name, Rupi Kaur, whose Milk and Honey, almost a compilation of 5 to 10-line short poems from Instagram, topped classical poets like Homer or Shakespeare in the sailing list for some reason. How would the emergence of Instapoets change the way we read, write, or interpret poetry? Well, they're shorter. We love to read 5 to 10 lines of ideas. They're faster. Collecting inspirations and posting them online are just a matter of seconds. They're easily shared. Poets across different regions don't have to fly over to another just to read one's poem. I myself joined an online poetry community called Poets Unite Worldwide. There's no simpler way to post the poems online, give feedback on online messages, and create an anthology in PDF. But most importantly, they're cheaper. The electronic switch makes the printing cost and processing cost of poetry to almost a bare minimum of zero. It is now making poetry accessible to everyone. Think about it. If you're an unpublished poet, try self-publishing an ebook. If you are one of the audience who's unwilling to spend most of their money on a huge collection of poetry, try subscribe to $3 per month for poetry forum where you can tag, favorite, or even talk to your poet online. Poetry has truly become a social phenomenon with the help of social media. The result looks fabulous. We have a more diverse group of poets and a more diverse group of audience. Poets across different identities are more equal in the online space, as the audience can find more ways to channel their voices through. Poetry used to be the thing that only the people with money and status can indulge in, but it is now becoming more approachable with its flair lexicons. Social media is pushing poetry in the right way. I'm convinced that social media will be pushing poetry to another level, much more than our imagination. Because social media is opening the borders of poetry. Gender, ideas, race, culture, ideology, they become the language that we use to personify ourselves, but that can be empathized universally. In China, with the help of social media, poetry became the center of public attention again. Yu Xiuhua, known as the cerebral palsy poet in China, was partially paralyzed since birth, but kept writing in her rooted language. WeChat, the Chinese messenger, made her poems popular among youth audience. Her latest poetry compilation, When the Moonlit Lands on My Left Hand, reached an amazing 200,000 sales per year. Xu Lizhi, the grassroots worker poet in China, inspired an online discussion about the treatment of heavy labor on Weibo, the Chinese Twitter. Although people value their stories more than their poems, for the first time in over 2 decades, poets reclaim public icons again. While the future of social media poetry sounds so promising, many people question, is social media truly pushing poetry to develop? Do more poems mean more good poems? Some critics even worry that the bad poems will just lower the standard of poems on social media. However, in order to have the poems first, we have to encourage more people to write, and then we can select our good poems from the rest. Social media provides just a platform to encourage more people to participate in this poetic journey. Poetry shouldn't be strictly defined or restrained. It belongs to us all. In fact, when poetry was pushed into the center of public stage, people would not consider it as the most important one. Yet the real poetry makes itself adaptive, meeting the audience where they are, speaking for individual stories, and encouraging more people to speak theirs too, especially in the times of chaos. Poetry sales increased by 12% in Britain in the midst of Brexit. In South Carolina, United States, people regained their values through poetry reading to cope with the shocking aftermath of mass shooting. In those moments, people found poetry's healing power. I am convinced that more good poems will stand out from the rest, especially on the social media, with the emergence of more poems on the social media platform. What's been keeping poetry adaptive is the quality that we understand and empathize human universally. Poetry is always there to accompany us when we need it. It is well alive to reflect our human needs and humanity. Imagine an ordinary but wonderful world where during every lunch break, you read a short poem. Maybe it's about the changing nature. Maybe it's about changing society, about the changing mentality, or even the changing world. But instead of commenting with the emojis in a comment bar, take a pause from your life and revisit all of the surprising and ongoing changes in your lives and your observations. Then you document that with an image, a metaphor, or even a poem. Afterwards, you post these poems online to join in a bigger community that celebrates poetry. Poetry is not a substitute of work, but a meaningful supplement of life. In Emily Dickinson's words, in this way, you truly become the imperial friend of your own. What a way to make ourselves heard and keep ourselves ourselves. The rise of poetry on social platform symbolizes two paradoxical needs of our modern human beings: being heard and being individual. We crave to be heard. We want our voices to count in the greater majority. However, we also fear that our voices are being compromised as we blend into the bigger community. Poetry on social media satisfies both of our needs. In some days, it will become a social necessity. Poetry is not dying. I hope in our hands, it is ever growing. Well, after reading Emily Dickinson's poem, I knew it was the time to grind on my statistics project. But just before that, on that night's WeChat, I posted my own poem. Still, in the dusty corners of the office, I find my unsettling soul. A long discarded vase breaks its shape to allow glow through the frosted chunks of codes. Thank you.